There is a part of you that decides before you do. It watches in silence while you try to be correct, controlled, acceptable, and while you pretend it doesn't exist, other people feel it. They can't explain it, but they sense the inconsistency, the smell of something repressed. That's where you lose respect, without understanding why. Those who deny their own shadow become predictable, readable, safe to be exploited. Because everything you refuse to acknowledge in yourself shows up distorted in the eyes of others, as weakness, guilt, moral rigidity, or a need for approval. The world does not punish you for having dark impulses. It punishes you for pretending you don't have them. You were taught that being good means suffocating instinct, that control means denying the monster. That's the trap. People who are too clean don't inspire trust. They inspire silent contempt. In the human hierarchy, those without teeth are treated like decoration. This isn't a character flaw. It's basic psychology, an ancient pattern repeated in every power dynamic. Jung saw it before everyone else. What you don't integrate ends up governing you from behind the scenes, and whoever doesn't govern themselves always ends up obeying someone else. There is a dark method to reverse this. It's not about becoming chaotic. It's about stopping the bleeding of power through blind spots. When you integrate the shadow, something changes in the air. People feel it, and the game starts to move in your favor. You are fighting with half your strength, not because you are weak, but because you keep the other half locked in a cell in the basement of your psyche. The anger you swallow during humiliating meetings, the envy you disguise as being happy for others, the selfishness you crush every time you say yes when every fiber of your being screams no. You were taught that being a good person requires sacrificing these impulses, cutting them out like malignant tumors. That belief didn't make you virtuous. It made you powerless. Because the impulses you bury don't die. They rot. They leak. They control you from the shadows while you perform sanctity in the light. Think about the last time you exploded over something small, the spilled coffee that triggered a disproportionate fury, the mild criticism that left you paralyzed for days. That wasn't about the coffee. It wasn't about the criticism. It was the accumulated pressure of 1,000 unexpressed angers, 1,000 denied desires, 1,000 pieces of yourself that were exiled to the unconscious because society said they were unacceptable. You walk through the world like an actor playing the role of a civilized person, but beneath the mask, there is a starving beast gnawing at the bars of the prison you built. And that beast is not your enemy. It is your power waiting to be integrated. Carl Jung, the architect of depth psychology, understood a truth that would destroy the foundation of superficial morality. He saw that the shadow, the repository of all repressed impulses, all aspects of the self judged unacceptable, is not evil to be eliminated. It is unrefined fuel, psychic raw material, pure energy that was labeled bad and buried alive. Jung spent decades observing that his weakest patients were not the ones with dark impulses. They were the ones who denied having them, the ones who insisted on being only light. Those were the neurotic, the depressed, the eternally dissatisfied. Meanwhile, the patients who became powerful were the ones who descended into their own abyss, faced the monsters below and said, "You are part of me. Let's negotiate." Today, you will learn the dark method of Jungian integration. Not the watered-down version of pop psychology that tells you to accept your flaws. The brutal version that demands confronting the impulses you are ashamed of. The cruelty you pretend not to feel. The manipulation you practice unconsciously. The desire for power you disguise as humility. I will show you how to systematically catalog every exiled piece of your psyche, how to dialogue with them as separate entities, how to turn repressed anger into magnetic presence, how to convert denied envy into devastating competitive fuel, how to channel suppressed selfishness into ruthless, strategic self-preservation. But be warned, this process kills the person you believe you are. The performative persona you present to the world, the nice one, the humble one, the always available one, that mask will crack and fall. And when it does, you will see the real face underneath. Some look and recoil, terrified by what they discover. They run back to comfortable fragmentation. Others look and recognize, for the first time, who they truly are. These become whole, integrated, dangerously powerful because they operate with the entire psyche, not just the socially approved fragment. If you are not ready to kill the censored version of yourself, leave now. For the rest, welcome to the basement. Let's begin the inventory. So why do you do this? Why do you mutilate your own psyche, cutting pieces of yourself off and throwing them into the unconscious as if they were toxic waste? The answer lies in childhood. You were not born fragmented. You were born whole. You were a child who cried when angry, who took the toy they wanted, who said no without guilt. You had full access to the spectrum of human experience. And then socialization began. Your parents said, "Don't be selfish." Your teacher said, "Don't be aggressive." Religion said, "Don't be proud." Society said, "Don't be too ambitious." And every time you expressed an impulse from the forbidden list, you were punished. Love was withdrawn. The look of disappointment. Social isolation. Your child brain, desperate for tribal survival, learned a devastating lesson. Parts of me are dangerous. I must hide them or I will be abandoned. So you began the split. You took anger and buried it. You took envy and disguised it. You took the desire for power and masked it as altruism. You built a persona, a social mask, that was acceptable, safe, approved. And every time the mask worked, every time you were rewarded for being a good person, your brain reinforced the strategy. The split deepened. The shadow grew, and you grew up believing the mask was the real face, that the performative person was who you truly are. That is the great lie that keeps you trapped. The mask is not you. It is a childhood survival strategy you never updated. And now it is suffocating you. The problem is that repressed psychic energy does not disappear. It cannot be destroyed, only transformed. Jung observed that when an impulse is consciously denied, it migrates to the unconscious and begins to operate autonomously. The anger you don't express does not evaporate. It leaks out as chronic irritability, as disproportionate outbursts, as psychosomatic illness. The envy you deny doesn't vanish. It shows up as constant judgment of others, as self-sabotage whenever you get close to success. The selfishness you repress doesn't die. It appears as passive-aggressive behavior, as resentful martyrdom, as the feeling of always giving and never receiving. You didn't eliminate these impulses. You just lost conscious control over them. Now they control you from behind your back. Jung used a surgical analogy. He said a fragmented psyche is like a body where half the organs have been declared evil and removed without anesthesia. The patient survives technically, but operates at half capacity. Always tired, always sick, always struggling. Why? Because they're trying to live without kidneys, without a liver, without a pancreas. The aggressiveness you amputated was the adrenaline needed to defend territory. The manipulation you cut out was the social intelligence needed to navigate hierarchies. The selfishness you extirpated was the self-preservation instinct needed to survive. You made yourself vulnerable by removing your defenses. And now you wonder why the world devours you. The first step of shadow integration is recognizing the anatomy of what was exiled. Jung created a precise map. The shadow contains specifically the impulses your upbringing deemed unacceptable. If you grew up in a family where anger was a sin, your shadow is saturated with repressed aggression. If you grew up where ambition was vanity, your shadow carries denied hunger for power. If you grew up where vulnerability was weakness, your shadow is full of unmet emotional needs. The shadow is personal. It is the photographic negative of your persona. Everything the mask says you are not, the shadow is. Everything you criticize most in others, arrogance, manipulation, selfishness, cruelty. These are precisely the traits you exiled from yourself and now project onto others. There is a brutal test of self-knowledge. Make a list of the people you most despise. Write down exactly what irritates you about them. He's arrogant. She's manipulative. They're selfish. Now the part that hurts. Every trait you list is a repressed aspect of yourself. The intensity of your disgust is proportional to the intensity of the repression. You don't hate arrogance in others because you are naturally humble. You hate it because your own arrogance was crushed so brutally in childhood that it now lives in the basement, and seeing it in others activates the trauma of repression. Jung called this shadow projection. The external world becomes a screen where you watch the movie of your own inner demons without realizing the projector is inside you. Stop pointing the finger. Turn the hand around. Look at who is pointing back. Now we arrive at the first integration technique, the shadow inventory. This is a practice of self-cataloging that will force you to list, with surgical detail, every impulse you deny having. Jung discovered that his patients violently resisted this exercise. Why? Because admitting the shadow on paper makes it real. It can no longer be ignored. Take a notebook. Do not do this digitally. The hand connected to paper has more direct access to the unconscious. At the top of the page, write, "Impulses I deny having." And then, without censorship, without judgment, begin to empty the basement. Write down the moments of envy. That time your friend got the promotion and you smiled and congratulated them while something twisted in your stomach. That time your brother bought his dream house and you felt anger instead of joy. Don't lie to the paper. It won't judge you. Write down the fantasies of revenge, the things you imagined doing to those who humiliated you but would never admit out loud. Write down the selfish thoughts. The times you helped someone not out of kindness, but because you wanted to be seen as good. The times you pretended interest in someone's story, while mentally planning what you were going to say next. Write down the cruel judgments, what you really think about people you consider inferior. The value rankings you constantly make, but deny making. The more you write, the more uncomfortable it becomes. The body starts to signal danger. Shame rises like bile. The inner voice screams, "Stop. You're a horrible person for having these thoughts." This is the persona's defense mechanism trying to interrupt the process. Ignore it. Keep writing. Jung observed that the strongest resistance appears precisely at the point where the most valuable material is buried. When you feel the urge to stop, it's a sign you're reaching the core. Go deeper. Write the sexual impulses you censor, the thoughts of power you disguise, the cruelty you pretend not to feel. Write everything. This inventory is not confession. It is not talk therapy. It is psychic archaeology. You are excavating unconscious territory and bringing the artifacts to the surface where they can be examined in conscious light. When you finish, and the inventory may take hours, days, weeks to be complete, read everything you wrote. Read without judgment. Treat it like scientific data, not moral evidence. Jung taught that the first step of individuation is recognizing that you contain multitudes. You are not only the kind persona, you are also cruel. You are not only humble, you are also arrogant. You are not only altruistic, you are also selfish. These polarities coexist. Fragmentation happens when you try to eliminate one side of the equation. Integration happens when you recognize, I am capable of all of this. And now I will consciously decide when to access each aspect instead of being unconsciously governed by them. The next stage is where most people abandon the process, because now you have to do something that defies all the logic of socialization. You have to dialogue with the shadow. Talk to it, not as an abstract concept, but as a separate entity with its own voice. Jung discovered this technique through what he called active imagination. He noticed that when patients personified aspects of the unconscious and dialogued with them, deep psychic integration occurred. The technique works because it bypasses the censorship of the conscious ego and allows unconscious material to express itself directly. Here's how to do it. Choose one of the impulses from your shadow inventory. Let's say you listed repressed anger toward my boss. Sit in silence. Close your eyes. Visualize this anger as a separate entity. Give it form. Many report seeing a shadowy figure, an animal, a distorted version of themselves. Don't force the image. Let it arise naturally. When the image stabilizes, ask out loud or mentally, "Who are you?" Wait. At first, nothing happens. You feel ridiculous talking to a visualization. Keep going. Ask again. What do you want? And then, if you hold the space, if you don't let the rational ego interrupt, the shadow responds. Not with an external voice. With thoughts that seem to come from somewhere else. Thoughts you recognize as yours, but with a different quality. More direct, more raw. The anger might answer, "I want you to stop being walked on. I want you to defend your territory." Envy might say, "I want you to admit that you want what others have. I want you to pursue it without guilt." Selfishness might speak, "I want you to stop sacrificing yourself for people who don't deserve it. I want you to prioritize your own survival." Jung noted that the shadow's responses were often surprisingly wise. Not destructive, but directive. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be integrated. It wants to stop living in exile. So it offers information the censored ego would never have access to. The truth about what you really want, about where your boundaries were violated, about what energy is being wasted. Continue the dialogue. Ask, "Why were you repressed?" The shadow may answer, "Because in childhood, when you showed anger, your father punished you. You learned that anger meant abandonment, so you locked me in here." Ask, "What happens if I integrate you?" The answer may come, "You stop imploding, you stop somatizing, you stop having migraines, insomnia, anxiety. All that energy I represent becomes consciously available again. You become whole." This conversation is not metaphorical. It is a real psychic operation. Jung observed that patients who completed series of these dialogues reported dramatic changes, increased physical energy, sudden mental clarity, disappearance of neurotic symptoms, a feeling of weight being lifted. Why? Because the internal civil war stopped. The energy that was being wasted keeping the shadow imprisoned was now available for conscious life. Do this with each impulse in the inventory. Dialogue with envy, with manipulation, with cruelty, with arrogance, with selfishness. Jung spent hours on this process with patients, sometimes entire sessions devoted only to active imagination. He knew that rushing here is a disaster. If you try to integrate the shadow forcefully, it resists. If you invite it into respectful conversation, it cooperates. The difference is between domination and negotiation. You're not trying to kill the shadow. You're bringing it to the negotiating table and asking, "How can we work together?" And when you ask that question sincerely, something extraordinary happens. The shadow, which was an enemy while in exile, becomes an ally when it is recognized. It stops sabotaging, stops leaking, because it finally has a seat in consciousness. Now, the third layer, strategic channeling. You have recognized the shadow. You have dialogued with it. Now, you must give it a conscious outlet. Jung saw this as psychological alchemy, transforming dark lead into conscious gold. Repressed aggressiveness, when channeled, does not become destructive violence. It becomes devastating assertiveness. The man who always avoided conflict, who always swallowed insults, who always let others walk over him, now accesses integrated anger and discovers a new presence. He enters negotiations and holds eye contact. He doesn't look away. He doesn't apologize for taking up space. Aggression, once unconscious and leaking out as passive aggression, is now a conscious tool for setting boundaries. He doesn't explode, he defines, and people feel the difference. They feel that something has changed, that he is no longer safe to exploit. Envy, when integrated, stops being poison and becomes competitive fuel. The woman who always denied ambition, who always pretended not to care when others rose, now admits, yes, I want what they have, and I will work relentlessly to get it. The guilt that once paralyzed her disappears. She stops sabotaging her own success, stops diminishing her achievements, stops apologizing for being competent. Integrated envy does not make her a bitter person. It makes her a sharp competitor. She studies what the envied people do, replicates the strategies, executes without the internal split that once made her hesitate. Jung observed that his most successful patients were often those who had integrated envy and converted it into pure motivation. Selfishness, when accepted, eliminates martyrdom. The individual who always sacrificed themselves, always said yes, always put others first while dying inside, now recognizes self-preservation is not a sin, it's a necessity. He starts saying no. Not with anger, not with elaborate justifications, but with calm clarity. This does not serve my interests. The people around him are shocked. They try to induce guilt. You've changed. You're selfish. He smiles. Yes, and you'll get used to it, or you'll leave. The manipulation that was once unconscious, the passive-aggressive games, the strategic illnesses, the use of guilt, is now conscious and can be used ethically when appropriate or discarded when unnecessary. Conscious influence replaces unconscious manipulation. He stops being a victim of his own patterns and becomes the strategist of his own life. See a concrete scenario, work meeting. Your boss publicly humiliates you, dismisses your idea in front of the team. The old you, with a repressed shadow, swallowed it. Left the room with a knot in your throat. Went home and exploded at your partner over something irrelevant. The anger leaked sideways because it had no direct outlet. The you with an integrated shadow accesses aggressiveness consciously. In the moment of humiliation, you hold eye contact. Let the silence hang. Then you speak, voice calm, but weighted. That was unnecessary. If you have criticisms of my work, we can discuss them professionally, not as a spectacle. Everyone in the room feels the shift in temperature. You didn't yell, you didn't make a scene, but you set a boundary with force that comes from depth. The boss, expecting submission, backs off, because they felt that you're no longer operating from fear. You're operating from wholeness. And wholeness is terrifying to those accustomed to dominating the fragmented. Another scenario. Your sister gets what you always wanted: the marriage, the house, the status. The old you, denying envy, smiles and congratulates her while something rots inside. Then you spend weeks depressed without understanding why. The you with integrated envy recognizes the feeling the moment it arises. I'm envious. I want that too. There's no shame in that observation. It's just data, so you genuinely congratulate your sister, and instead of getting depressed, you use envy as a map. You ask yourself, what exactly am I envying? The marriage or the stability it represents? The house or the feeling of success? The status or the recognition? You dissect the envy, understand what it's signaling about your own unmet desires, and channel the energy into an action plan. Envy stops being paralyzing and becomes diagnostic. It becomes an emotional GPS pointing to where your psyche wants to grow. Final scenario. Someone in your life asks you for a favor that drains resources you don't have. The old you, with repressed selfishness, said yes, and resentment grew. You sacrificed yourself and then wondered why you felt used. The you with integrated selfishness examines the request through the lens of self-preservation. Does this serve my interests? Do I have surplus resources, or am I operating in the red? If the answer is, I don't have the resources, you say, I can't help this time. No elaboration, no invented excuses. The person may pressure you, but I need it. You respond, I understand, and I need to take care of my stability. The conversation ends. You don't feel guilt because you know self-preservation is a primary function of a healthy organism. Animals don't sacrifice themselves to death for other animals. Only humans programmed to perform sanctity do that. And you're no longer a performer. You're an integrated individual. The fifth and final layer is individuation, the central concept of all Jungian psychology. Individuation is not becoming special or unique. It's becoming an individual, in the sense of indivisible, not divided. When you integrate the shadow, you stop living in internal civil war. You stop wasting psychic energy maintaining repression. You stop leaking neurotic symptoms. All that energy becomes available again. Jung compared the pre-integration psyche to a house where half the rooms are locked and you live cramped in the permitted rooms. Individuation is unlocking all the doors. You don't need to live in all the rooms simultaneously, but you have access to them when needed.
The room of aggressiveness when someone violates your boundaries. The room of manipulation when you need to navigate office politics. The room of selfishness when your survival is at stake. The room of cruelty when mercy would be self-sabotage. The individuated person is not morally superior. They are psychologically complete. They can be kind when kindness is strategic. They can be cruel when cruelty is necessary. They can cooperate when cooperation serves the objective.
They can compete ruthlessly when the situation demands it. There is no internal split creating paralyzing hesitation. There is clarity. Jung noted that his most powerful patients were not the best in the conventional sense. They were the most whole. The ones who had descended into their own psychic hell, made peace with all the demons down there, and now operated with the full psychic orchestra playing, not just one or two permitted notes. The integrated individual carries the shadow not as a burden they drag, but as a full deck of cards they can play as the context requires. This is not lack of character. It's breadth of resources. The man who can only be kind is not virtuous. He is limited. Kindness ceases to be a virtue when it's the only option available. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you have a full toolbox, you choose the appropriate tool. Cruelty toward enemies, kindness toward allies. Manipulation for systems that don't respond to honesty. Honesty for people who deserve it. The integrated individual is not chaotic. They are contextually appropriate. And that is far more sophisticated than simplistic binary morality. Jung observed that modern Western culture created an epidemic of fragmentation. We are taught from childhood that half of the human experience is unacceptable. Anger is bad. Envy is a sin. Selfishness is immoral. Desire for power is vanity. Cruelty is monstrous. So people mutilate their own psyche trying to live up to the impossible ideal. And the result is a society of neurotics, depressed, anxious, addicted, people desperately trying to maintain repression while the shadow screams from the basement. Anxiety and depression rates are not a mystery. They are symptoms of mass fragmentation. They are the bill coming due for the collective denial of the dark half of the human psyche. The solution is not to unleash the shadow without filter and act like an animal. It is to integrate consciously. It is to say, I recognize that I have the capacity for cruelty, manipulation, selfishness, aggressiveness. I will not pretend these impulses don't exist. I will bring them into consciousness. I will dialogue with them, and I will decide when and how to use them. The difference between the psychopath and the integrated individual is consciousness. The psychopath acts from the shadow unconsciously, without moral break, without regard for consequence. The integrated individual has access to the same impulses, but uses them deliberately, strategically, with full awareness of cause and effect. One is governed by impulses. The other governs impulses. It's the difference between being a raging sea and being the captain of a ship navigating a raging sea. When you complete integration, when you have catalogued the shadow, dialogued with it, channeled it strategically, and reached individuation, something fundamental changes in your presence. You enter rooms differently. People feel it, even if they can't articulate what they feel. You are no longer performing. You are no longer pretending to be only light. You carry conscious darkness, And that darkness paradoxically makes you more trustworthy. Why? Because fragmented people who deny their own shadow, leak. They are unpredictable. They explode at inappropriate moments. They act passive-aggressively. They betray on unconscious impulse. You, integrated, are solid, predictable. When you are kind, it's because you chose to be. When you are hard, it's because the situation required it. There is no incongruence between inner and outer. What you feel, you recognize. What you recognize, you can control. What you control, you can use strategically. You stop being hostage to reactions. You stop exploding over spilled coffee because anger has a regular conscious outlet. You stop being paralyzed by criticism because you integrated the inner critic and now use criticism as feedback, not as a weapon against self-worth. You stop sabotaging your own success because envy has been channeled into productive motivation. You stop being drained by people because integrated selfishness establishes clear boundaries. Jung saw this and knew he was observing what he called the selbst, the self with a capital S, the psychic totality. Not the inflated ego, but the complete individual operating with all systems online. There is a final paradox that must be stated. The more you integrate the shadow, the more capable you become of true compassion. This sounds contradictory. How does recognizing dark impulses make you more compassionate? Because when you admit that you too are capable of cruelty, manipulation, selfishness, you stop judging others for being capable of the same things. You see someone acting cruelly, and instead of moral superiority, you recognize this person is acting from an unintegrated shadow. They are not choosing consciously. They are being governed by unconscious impulses. This is not an excuse for destructive behavior. It is an understanding of mechanism. An understanding allows appropriate response instead of moralistic reaction. The fragmented person sees evil in others and feels virtuous disgust. I would never do that. That disgust is a projection of their own repressed shadow. The integrated person sees evil in others and recognizes, I have the capacity for that. I choose not to exercise it. This person didn't make the same choice because of trauma, ignorance, or fragmentation. This creates psychological distance. You stop taking other people's behavior personally. You stop being so easily wounded. Because you understand that people are always acting from their own internal movies, their own psychic conflicts, their own unintegrated shadows. They are not attacking you. They are leaking their own demons. And when you understand that, you can respond strategically instead of reacting emotionally. But all of this philosophy collapses without practice. Jung did not offer theories for academic debate. He offered tools for psychic operation. The discomfort of application will arise. You will sit down to do the shadow inventory, and the ego will resist violently. It will try to convince you that this exercise is narcissism, self-pity, pseudoscientific nonsense. That resistance is a symptom that you are touching repressed material. The more resistance, the more important the material. When you begin the dialogue with the shadow, you will feel ridiculous. I am literally talking to myself. This is crazy. Persist. Jung spent hours on this practice, and he was, by far, one of the most important psychologists of the 20th century. If he didn't consider this a waste of time, perhaps you should reconsider your quick judgment. The first week of strategic channeling will be clumsy. You will try to access integrated aggressiveness and overdo it, acting inappropriately hostile. This is normal. It's like learning to drive. At first you hit the brakes too hard, then the accelerator. With practice comes sensitivity. You learn dosage. How much aggressiveness is assertiveness? How much is unnecessary hostility? The difference between healthy selfishness, self-preservation, and pathological narcissism. Between strategic manipulation and psychological abuse. These nuances don't come from reading. They come from trial, error, and calibration. And most people quit during the calibration phase because it's uncomfortable. They read about shadow integration, find the concept fascinating, and then never do the real work. They remain fragmented, now merely armed with sophisticated Jungian vocabulary to to describe their own impotence. The brutal truth is that there is a clear and permanent division between two groups. The majority will read this, agree intellectually, and continue living as fragmented personas. They will keep repressing impulses, denying the shadow, performing approved versions of themselves, while neurosis and unhappiness grow like a psychic tumor. They will die never having known who they truly were, never having operated with a complete psyche, never having felt the power of individuation. This is not judgment. It is statistical observation. Jung saw this repeatedly. Most people prefer the comfortable prison of fragmentation to the uncomfortable work of integration. That is their choice. And then there is the smaller group, those who don't just read, but execute, who take the notebook and do the shadow inventory, even when the ego screams to stop, who sit in silence and dialogue with exiled impulses, even while feeling ridiculous, who practice strategic channeling, fail, calibrate, and try again, who tolerate the discomfort of transformation because they know the discomfort is temporary, while fragmentation is permanent if left untreated. These are the rare ones. And when you encounter one of them, you recognize it immediately. There is solidity, there is presence, there is an absence of neurotic need for approval, there is congruence between inner and outer. They are not trying to prove anything. They are not performing goodness. They are not pretending to be only light. They simply are. Complete. Whole. Dangerously real in a world of masks. You have a choice now. You can close this and return to fragmented life. Continue repressing, denying, performing. Continue spending psychic energy keeping the shadow locked away while it leaks through the pores. You can treat this knowledge as intellectual entertainment. Add Jung to the list of authors you mention in sophisticated conversations but never actually apply. Or you can do something different. You can pick up the notebook tonight and start the inventory. You can list the first impulse you deny having. You can sit in silence tomorrow and attempt the first dialogue. You can observe over the next few days where the shadow is leaking unconsciously and decide to integrate it consciously. You can begin the process of individuation that most will avoid until death. If you choose the second path, know that this is not a journey for the weak. This is not motivational self-help. This is not a 3-step hack for instant happiness. It is a deliberate descent into your own psychic hell. It is confrontation with every aspect of yourself you have spent your entire life avoiding. It is the death of the comfortable persona and the birth of the real individual. Jung said that individuation is the work of a lifetime. It is not something you complete over a weekend or with a 21-day online course. It is a commitment to examine, dialogue, integrate, repeat, continuously, until the split between conscious and unconscious dissolves, and you operate as a psychic totality. But here is what most people never tell you about shadow integration. There is deeper knowledge that cannot be discussed openly. Aspects of Jungian work that are censored, misunderstood, or deliberately hidden because they challenge the foundations of collective morality. Techniques of dark channeling that are too effective to be taught publicly without proper context. Dialogues with specific archetypes of the collective unconscious that open psychic territories most people are not prepared to navigate. These aspects exist, but they remain behind the join button at the architect level, where the real work is done without the limitations of algorithmic censorship or superficial moralization. If you are tired of living as half of yourself, if you are ready to stop performing and start being, if the discomfort of fragmentation has finally outweighed the fear of integration, then you know what to do. Join, not because I asked you to, but because you just decided that the prison of the persona must be destroyed. Click. Join not to support content, but to signal commitment to the process of individuation that will permanently separate you from the fragmented mass that lives and dies without ever knowing its real face. Most will watch, nod along, and keep sleeping. That is the point. The deep territories are for few. I'll see you in the shadows. Or not. It's your choice.